Hey there, this is Norton Buffalo saying congratulations and thank you to John Broughton for 20 years on the air. You're listening to Retrospectives on 3SER, KC Radio. Thanks a lot, John.
My father played harmonica, so I started playing as quite a young boy. I think somewhere around the age of 7.
Oh, that young. Wow.
Yeah, we used to sit around the house and play old folk songs and stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Are there any harmonica players at that young age that were grabbing your attention?
When I was that young, the only person besides my father that I think I heard was some records by Larry Adler that he had around the house that were always real nice to listen to. But no, mostly it was just I was just a kid playing old songs on the harmonica and getting in talent contests and stuff like that at the school. That's how I started out.
How about as the years went on and you started to get older and maybe thinking about music as a career, were there any harmonica players then you were starting to look towards?
Well, as I got older, I got into, I think the first phase I got into was listening to a lot of jug band records. And so I was listening to the old Jim Kweskin jug band, which I think it was a guy named Mel Lyman that was playing the harmonica on those. And then I found some old, an old collection called Jugs, Washboards, and Kazoos. I can't remember what label it was on. It was a collector type of reproduction, and had a bunch of old-time jug band stuff, and I pulled some harmonica licks off that. The next thing I got into, of course, was hearing some blues records in the mid-'60s when the blues stuff started hitting. I heard the first Paul Butterfield album when it came out, the first Charlie Musselwhite album, which came out about the same time. And about the same time I got into, I found an old Sonny Terry album a friend of mine turned me on to, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee.
Yeah.
So really those were the first 3 records that introduced me to the blues as it was. I was already pretty accomplished on the harmonica.
Sure.
I'd already been playing quite a long time and was pretty darn good. But learning to bend notes and find out what the blues was a lot of fun.
What was
and
it?
It was a whole new game. It meant that, hey, you mean I can play this in a band too? This is cool. Because up until then I was a solo act, you know?
Yeah. What do you think it was about the blues that grabbed your attention then?
Well, the thing about them that grabbed my attention was, of course, that it was another dimension of the harmonica.
Yeah.
That I hadn't explored yet. Up until then, the only bending of notes that I was doing was really on the high end on straight harmonica, first position type harmonica. And so there was a whole other world of notes and emotions and feelings. This harmonica sounds, mean. This harmonica sounds angry. This harmonica sounds sad. And so there was a whole new dimension of emotions that came out of the harmonica hearing the blues. And also, I really loved Sonny Terry because I had already been using a lot of rhythm in my harmonica in my playing up until then, playing some of the old folk songs and stuff that I played. When you play by yourself, you learn to create your own rhythm. So Sonny Terry was great to me because it felt closer to what I already knew.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed hearing that record, and I learned a few things off of some of those albums, and started getting into doing it on my own. The thing that happened though was that then people would start saying, "Oh, you sound like Paul Butterfield," or "You sound like Sonny Terry," and so as a young kid, I was only about 14 or 15 at the time. I didn't want to sound like anybody else. I was, just being a cocky little kid. So at that point, I really decided that I wasn't going to sound like anybody else. I was going to sound like me, doggone it. And so I pretty much quit listening to a lot of other records of harmonica players and started gathering my notes and my style as a harmonica player from other instruments. And I think that's really the point at which I sort of set out on my own path, and it was while I was still in high school. I got involved in playing it also in the school jazz band. We had a jazz band at the school that we played in, and I also played trombone. So I started playing the harmonica in that, and that was good. It was good for me because I was playing the chromatic and playing a diatonic, and it was a lot more, once again, a good expansion of what I did into a new direction.
So playing other instruments like the trombone have certainly helped your harmonica playing.
Oh, absolutely, because it meant that, like playing in the symphonic band and all the different groups I played in at school. I was in the pep band and the marching band and the symphonic band and the jazz band. I had a much broader introduction to different styles of music. So my spectrum of music that I've been exposed to in my life, I've continued to expand it and not be just sort of locked into one style of playing. I grew to love the blues, but until the albums that I did with Roy Rogers, my albums and my music was never strictly blues. It was always a very versatile bunch of music.
So it always will remain important to you to keep that musical versatility there.
Yeah, I feel that when I don't have broader boundaries, I start feeling like I'm trapped in a small box.
Yeah. Had a long association with Steve Miller over the years, playing in his band. How did that first come about?
Well, Steve and I had some mutual friends that had both been telling each of us about each other, and the actual introduction that I had with Steve in person was at a club in Berkeley, California, in 1975, and we got up on stage and jammed. The jam session had it had Boz Scaggs, Doug Clifford, who was the drummer from Creedence Clearwater, Tommy Johnson, the guitar player from the Doobie Brothers, Bill Kirchen, the guitar player from Commander Cody, and Bill and his wife were the ones that introduced me to Steve that evening. And we both laughed about these other people who had been telling us about each other for so long, and we had a great time playing that night, and got together again about a week later at a party that some friends of ours were throwing, and jammed blues and all kinds of other crazy stuff for about 4 hours. Just had a ball. And Steve at the time was just beginning to record his tracks for Fly Like an Eagle. And he was doing that in San Francisco. So I started dropping in on the sessions and getting involved with him, and we hit it off real well and started doing stuff right then.
Are you still touring with Steve to this day?
Yeah, I'm going to be on tour with him beginning March 24th. We start a tour that begins down in New Orleans.
And that must take up a lot of time. Does that sometimes mean you have to put your own career on the back burner, so to speak?
Well, it does, yeah. It's been both a boom, a help and a detriment to my career. The amount of time that I take up performing and touring with Steve obviously makes it difficult for me to, especially because during the summer there's a lot of festivals and a lot of touring I could do. Or, for instance, this spring, the last 3 years in the spring, I've been touring with Steve, which has stopped me from being able to come down to Byron Bay and the Blues Festival and do some of the touring I was doing in Australia, which I really love doing. So yeah, the stuff I do with Steve is a little bit of a slowdown, but it's also very good for my career.
Oh, sure.
And it also helps me. It's also helped me put my studio together financially. It's given me the funds to help me put my own studio together, which is where I'm recording my newest album that I've been working on with my band. So
you've done a lot of sessions over the years. I was just looking at a list earlier before we came on, and would there be any particular that stand out as particularly special for you?
Out of my career stuff, the things I've done,
the sessions that you've done with others, yeah.
Well, I think one of the ones I enjoy the most, because it just was such a doggone good solo and a great tune, was the solo I played with Bonnie Raitt on Runaway.
Runaway, yeah.
that was years ago, and to be honest, I had I was very sick that day. I had 102 fever. I didn't tell anybody in the studio that I was sick, but I was just sweating and feeling really lousy, and I tried all kinds of chromatic ideas on that song, and was pretty much, they were pretty well ready to give up, and I finally said, hey, if this were my record, let me try one more thing. If this were my record, this is what I'd do. And I don't know why I didn't do that at first. But it was a great solo. I also did some really good work on, there was a song I did on one of the Doobie Brothers albums called Living on the Fault Line.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a song called There's a Light that I played a really nice chromatic solo, and then at the end I did a real nice diatonic thing on. So that was fun. And, down through the years, there's just been so many. It's somewhere around 100 albums that I've played on that I can remember, or that I've recorded on paper.
To go to the other extreme, would there be anyone in particular that afterwards you thought, gee, I wish I hadn't done that, it just didn't work?
No, because I usually end up putting stuff down. There's been things where maybe when it's come out I've thought, gosh, I can't hear it, or they sure made that tone lousy, things like that. But pretty much I've tried to not put anything that I regret on on a tape. There have been some sessions, people that are easier to deal with than others, but no, I don't have any regrets.
The two albums
with Norton Buffalo. Let's not waste any more time. Let's go right back into it.
Must be particularly proud of the two albums that you did with Roy Rogers. Where and when did you first meet up with Roy?
Well, Roy, when my first two albums on Capitol came out back in the 70s, Roy had a duet with another harmonica player. And I was doing a lot of shows with my band, so I had those guys opening up a lot of my shows. And it was real fun. It was a fun combination. I mean, I had jugglers and comedians and all kinds of stuff. I tried to make a real enjoyable show. And so Roy and I got to be friends. Then I think it was back in about 86, either 86 or 87. I'd been putting a couple different acoustic things together for myself, but I was really struggling because all the guitar players I was playing with just really didn't fill the sound spectrum. There was something always missing. I was always, I'd gotten used to having a group behind me, and so just one guitar player was never enough. I hooked up with Roy, and one guy is enough. It was like having a freight train behind you. He's just a real pleasure to play with, and we hit it off musically. I think partly because we'd heard each other well enough down through the years and knew each other's music well enough that it was real easy for us to get along musically, and we just really hit it off just immediately. It was one of those fun things.
It was a great combination.
And it's still that way. We do a handful of shows every year. We don't do a ton of shows, but the shows we do, we don't beat a bunch of rehearsals to death. We don't bang it around real hard that way. We really keep it fresh, and I think that way, when we go on stage, it's very spontaneous, and a lot of what happens between Roy and I is about the spontaneity.
Yeah. Talk about the songwriting process for you. Do you have a particular method or way of going about it that seems to work best for you?
What happens with me with songwriting is there's several ways I go about it. One is, and I think I've probably written the most material. Of course, I write a lot of, not so much just melodies, but a lot of lyrics. Most of that starts when I'm driving in the car.
All right. How does that work?
As I drive along, melodies come to me, and I get an idea that, of both melody and lyric, that then I take back to the house, and I'll either accompany myself with a guitar or a keyboard, depending on the type of song it is. Some guitars, some songs, were written with either. The other couple ways I write it is to just sit down at the keyboard and basically write a tune or come up with a riff. I've even gone so far as to find a groove with the drum machine or something like that I like, or in some cases take the band in the studio and actually cut a groove, get a groove going, and make changes, and actually record a whole song that then I bring back to the house and just listen to incessantly until the lyrics come to me. And I've actually come up with some great songs that way. And the same thing, like I say, here at the house or in my studio, I'll come up with something on the keyboard that just feels good, and once I create the song, then I'll write the lyrics to that song. So it's sort of, both are very backwards from each other, but they both end up with the same effect.
And if all that fails, just go for a long drive.
Yeah, well, there have been times when I'm writing and the lyrics are coming out fluently, I won't stop driving. I'll keep going. I'll go right by where I've got to go. And, I don't rely on things like tape recorders in the car or anything like that, because I figure that if the song is strong enough, it'll stick with me.
Yeah.
On my first albums in the 70s, I know some of those songs were written while I was driving a forklift in this factory I was working in. Just the sound of the rhythms of the machines. I think there's something about the highway, though, that really promotes rhythm and inspiration for songs.
Now you've done some writing for movies and television over the years. Is that harder to do than writing for your own records?
It's difficult in the sense that you're writing for a specific scene, and actually some of the songs that I've come up with, I've begun even by reading the script, and I've come up with the basics, even melody and rhythm for some of the music on the film scores, just from reading the script. And then once I see the film, I see how it works, and I may change the groove or the tempo or even the lyrics somewhat to fit the scene better. Instrumentation, if you want to make it moodier or softer or more exciting. But writing for film is really enjoyable. I haven't done it now in about 12 years. Maybe not so long. I did some unsolved mysteries, the episodes for these unsolved mystery shows that they have here. And those weren't quite so long ago. But the films that I scored, they were quite a while back, and I really enjoyed it. I've got a sort of an it's gotten so electronic these days, and there's been so many people that have MIDI studios that are turning out soundtracks now, that the competition is much tougher than it was back then. The scores I used were all with real instruments and orchestrations and stuff like that.
Yeah. You've also dabbled in a bit of acting over the years. How does performing for a camera compare to performing in front of an audience for you?
Well, I have to say that when I was done with those movies, boy, did I want to get out and play. I was in the rows, and of course that involved a lot of performing and playing, a lot of months of rehearsing and getting ready for those performances, though. And the Rose was wonderful. Heaven's Gate, the one I did, was beautiful in the sense that I got to live in Montana for 6 or 7 months. And it's such a beautiful state right there in the Rocky Mountains. Lots of fishing and horseback riding and roller skating and things that we did in the movie. So those were wonderful things to do. But once again, when I got done with those movies, boy, did I want to play music. And so there's no real comparison. They're both great things to do, and I enjoy them both. I actually picked up an agent to do some acting with last fall, and I have yet to grab any parts. But, yeah, those are all things I'd like to get back into again. And I got out of some of that stuff. I got real busy raising some children, and the kids are getting bigger now, so it's getting to that point now where old Dad can get back into some of the action again.
Talk about the recording process. Are you more comfortable in the studio or on stage?
I would say equally. The stage is more spontaneous, and there's the thing that happens on stage is there's a cycle of energy that happens. I put out the music and my energy that comes from me, and it gets sent out to the audience. and the audience in turn sends energy back to me, usually, and hopefully that's good energy. But so there's a cycle that happens, and it feeds me, and it really is very fulfilling. The recording process, I would say that I tend to be very critical of myself, and I have a hard time letting go and being as spontaneous as I know I need to be. So I say, well, I would probably prefer the live, and I go out and I play a lot of shows live. Recording in the studio, I still love it and enjoy it very much. When I'm recording for myself, though, I'm tough on myself because I want it to be both. I want it to have both the spontaneity and the good live feeling, but I also want it to be perfect, doggone it. So I demand of myself quite a bit.
Yeah.
The album I just finished, I think I did a very good job of allowing it to be loose, and I try to break that trend.
Tell us a little bit about the new album.
I have a new album. We haven't shopped it for the record deal yet, but the graphics are done and the album is done. It'll be called King of the Highway, and it's a blues album. I just went to the tunes I've been doing down through the years and wrote a handful of new things, and it's really a good album. It's versatile, but it's all within the framework of the blues. It's got some really good harmonica playing. I think it's got some good songwriting on it, and the band that backed me up, which is my band, the Knockouts, is really playing well. It's a great record. Had a couple guest artists playing with me. Elvin Bishop played guitar on one song. Merle Saunders played organ on a handful of songs. It's a very good album.
Could you just run by the background, some of the guys in the Knockouts for us?
The guys in my band, I've had a group of guys behind me now that have been around with me for a long time. My bass player is David Brown. David Brown is originally from Jacksonville, Florida. Years ago was in a band called the 31st of February, another group called Cowboy, which had, the 31st of February had Chuck Leavell, who now plays with the Rolling Stones, and Butch Trucks, who's became the drummer for the Allman Brothers. David ended up playing later on down the line with, he knew both Dwayne and Greg Allman, and those were all friends of his. In fact, David's mentioned in one of the more recent books about the Allman Brothers. David then played with Greg Allman, later played with Boz Scaggs for a long time and wrote some songs for Boz. Had a band in the 70s called Mistress, which had a record out. And he's been with me for 13 years now. He's a wonderful guy and a great bass player. My guitar player is Johnny Vernazza. And Johnny grew up in the Bay Area, played with a guy named Gideon, who was a sort of a gospel soul cat. Played for years with the Elvin Bishop Band, and was in on all the Fooled Around and Fell in Love times. Johnny played the guitar with Elvin on a lot of his albums, and then he started playing with me in the early 80s. Through, I think he played for me about 7 or 8 years, and then went off and started doing some other stuff, and he's been back with me for about 4 or 5 years now. He also plays with a gal named Annie Sampson, who used to be in a group called Stone Ground. Johnny's a wonderful guitar player. And my drummer is a guy named Tyler Eng. Tyler played with Charlie Musselwhite when he was quite young. Then also played for a long time with Elvin Bishop. And after Elvin, Tyler went off and did quite a few years with Greg Kinn. And he's a great drummer. So this band, those are the basic members of my band. I also use quite often a keyboard player named David Matthews, not the same guy that has all the hits these days. And David Matthews is just an incredible keyboard player. I think right now he's playing with Boz Scaggs. He also toured for a lot of years with Etta James, Maria Muldaur, quite a few other people, and he's a good guy. So the band I have is just a really, well, I call it Norton and the Knockouts. These guys really are knockouts.
Yeah, there's some
they
seasoned
pump it up.
players there.
And the other thing that's great about it is we go, like we're getting ready, we leave a week from today on a tour to Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana. And these guys, it's just really painless traveling with these guys. They're you know, we don't have all the shenanigans that go on with some of the younger bands that I can remember we went through when we were younger. You know, the getting wild.
They've grown out of it all.
Yeah, we've grown out of it, and so now we're just going out and we're playing great music and we're having a good time at doing it. And so I'm really looking forward to getting this album out.
What would be the extent of your live work with the Knockouts, and what portion of the year would you spend on the road there?
With my band, I usually go out and do my tours in February and March, and then I like I say, I'm out with Steve for the latter part of March and April and early May. Then I'm out with Steve during the summer. Then I do a tour with my band usually in the fall again, and then I'm home in the Bay Area, in San Francisco area here, from usually November through mid-February. And during that time, I play all kinds of local shows. I play around the Bay Area and San Francisco area, Northern California, driving in the rain, as it were.
Okay, Norton, look, I won't hold you up any longer. Thank you very much for your time this morning. It's been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure.
Pleasure talking to you. You're always a welcome visitor down here. We hope it's not too long before we get to catch you down here again.
Yeah, the last time I was trying to remember. It seems like a guy named Anthony Harkin that plays harmonica down your way. Isn't that right?
Rings a bell, yeah.
Yeah, I remember jamming with him in a little hotel down there and having a good time. And also, I can't remember all the people's names. There's a gal that plays harmonica in a group called the Cats.
Cats, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't, their name escapes me at the moment too.
It's right on the top of my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you talk to any of those people, tell them I said hey.
Will do. We hope we see you down here shortly, or not too distant future anyway.
Okay.
Thanks, Norton. All the best.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.